Once I've got my subject and my lighting where I want it, it's time to actually start working with the camera. Remember, I'm substituting my D7000 with my D60. Normally I would shoot with a wired remote, but I'm going to have to do it with the camera release. I could use the IR remote, which I have, but then I'm holding it out here. So we'll just pretend I'm using the D7000. I don't have a tripod with a geared column, so sometimes making vertical adjustments can be a little difficult. If that's the case, I can always manipulate the third hands to do that, or I might just take a lens cap and slide it up underneath to raise it instead of trying to lower the camera. Of course, I have the 3 axes available on the tripod head, and sometimes I find that the subject might start to droop, so instead of trying to change it, I'll simply tilt the camera slightly. But at this point, I'm interested in the composition of the subject. I'm also interested in, of course, the exposure. I'm going to set my exposure. I'm also interested in where on this focus rail the front and the rear focus points are. And that's one of the beauties of a focus rail, is you can make slight changes in the camera position with just the turn of a knob. Instead of having to move the whole camera forward or move the subject back forward and back, I can move the camera right straight along the axis of the lens. So the first thing I'm going to do is get my composition and my focus. And sometimes I will actually move the subject, which sometimes causes me to have to adjust the camera to get the subject in focus. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this back a little bit until I get the very front part of what I want in focus. At this point, I'm just going to fire off a shot. I'm going to check the histogram and the LCD monitor here to see what my image looks like. I may have to adjust my lighting. Generally, I'm shooting an f32 or f22, so I don't have a whole lot of latitude if it's overexposed. In the camera, I have to work with the lighting, so that means I move the lights back or dial them down. It may take several shots to actually get that where I want it to be. Once I get the exposure down, I'll simply go ahead and delete those in the camera, because I don't need those shots and I don't want to get confused by them in post. Again, I'm normally shooting with a D7000. I would use a wired remote, but since the D60 isn't capable of that, I'm just going to represent that with the shutter button. One thing about my focus rail is it has a little bit of play in it, so as I move the camera forward and back, it tends to rack one way or the other. When I move it back, it tends to turn the camera lens this way. When I move it forward, it moves it this way. So what I will do is I will first adjust my camera so my first point of focus, or my near point of focus, is in sharp focus, and make a note of a scale on the side here. In this case, it's just a little past 3. What I will do is I will back it up and then put a little bit of tension on this to keep her from sliding, and then I will bring it back to that point. The reason being is I don't want to back up and have the camera this way in my first shot and then start to move forward and have it go this way. Makes it hard for the software to align everything. So if I come up onto that first shot, and every subsequent shot will have the camera turned this way slightly due to that little bit of play here in this focus rail. But at this point, it's just a matter of going through and taking the individual frames. Once I get to the point where I have the back or the far end of my focus points photographed, it's time to shut all this off, pull the card, and go off to the computer and do a little post-processing.